I almost think of it like those little distressed plants that you can get at the store right now, and they're like $2 for this distressed plant, and you're like, but all it needs is a little bit of water and shade, and then you put it in the shade, and you give it some water, and eventually it grows. Anyway, you are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we teach music educators like you how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. I am your host, and I'd like to think I am your friend and supporter, Elisa Jansen-Jones. You can find all the resources I create for music educators like you on my blog at professionalmusiceducator.com, and you can find me on Facebook. Feel free to send me a Facebook friend request anytime you like. This episode is another in a series of ideas you may want to implement your next school year, or halfway through this one, wherever you happen to be. Since this is something most of us in the U.S. are at least currently thinking about. Today, my guest is one of my favorite resources to tap for all things related to program growth, and that's my buddy Bruce Rockwell. We've had Bruce on before talking about tips for working with your school administration, and he gave me so much awesome content, we had to turn it into 2 episodes. In this episode, we both share our best tips for struggling programs, whether you're just starting at a new school where the program needs a little TLC and you're ready to rebuild, or if you've been at your school for a while and are just really ready to amp things up. We give you a 3-step process to really help simplify it for you. Both Bruce and I have been in this type of situation. In fact, I'm in the middle of it right now, about to start a new school year where I've added middle school band and choir to my K-5 assignment. We've never had a middle school choir at my school before, so I get to start it from scratch. Bruce was in a similar situation a few years ago, taking over a struggling choir program that he's now built into something robust and truly special for his school and community. We'll be sharing with you how we work with our administration to ensure program success, where we put our biggest efforts to make the largest impact, and how we can ensure growth year after year, whether that growth is enrollment numbers or performance improvement, or even adding class offerings for your students. And most importantly of all, we help you know the very first step you need to take to get started on improvement. And it's that step that every single teacher should make every single year. But first, have you taken some time to learn what smart music can do for you in your classroom? May I recommend you take 10 minutes this week and check out their many online training videos posted to YouTube. Or you can access the sessions that they just taught this summer as part of the 2018 International Music Education Summit. Because yes, you may have missed attending the summit live, but you can now gain access to the entire 35 sessions via the archives. Just go to musicedsummit.org/2018 to learn more and check out Smart Music's videos on YouTube. Now, let's talk about building up your music program with Bruce.
I'm Bruce Rockwell. I teach at College Park High School in the East Bay, California. And I've been here at 8 years, going on my 9th year. And this was a position that started out as a 40% choral position. And even though there are 2,000 students in the school, there were only 2 choirs. They were neglected, and administrators were dumping students in them just to keep the sections open, and nobody wanted to be in choir, and choir is horrible. And so I really understand this idea that we're talking about rescuing a program, and I think it's really important because that's where most recent graduates are going to be placed into, less than ideal circumstances, right? And you're not going to get a job, a full-time position in an established program where everything is working well and you've got good student buy-in and a good booster program and everything's in line. You'd be really, really lucky to get that kind of a job just right out the gate. So most people are hired into situations where there's a lot of building to be done, and you don't get that kind of experience in most student teaching situations. You're placed in the strong programs, so that's what you're used to dealing with. That's what you're used to seeing. That may be the kind of situation that you came from as a student, but then you have this situation where you've got scheduling problems where students can't take your music classes. You've got low student buy-in, where there's not a perception of quality, so it's hard to recruit. Maybe your feeder situation is dysfunctional. All kinds of problems, and because it's not really in your experience, you're not really equipped to handle that. So I'm glad that we're talking about this subject, because I think it's very, very important.
Well, and that's why I wanted to bring you on, is because you're kind of my polar opposite. You have this huge school and this huge student body in your choral mainly, right? You do guitar as well?
Yeah,
Am I
yeah. I
remembering that
started
right?
the guitar program, right?
So you've had longer to kind of grow this thing and recover this program. I almost think of it like those little distressed plants that you can get at the store right now, and they're like $2 for this distressed plant, and you're like, but all it needs is a little bit of water and shade, and then you put it in the shade, and you give it some water, and eventually it grows. Anyway, metaphor aside, I am taking over a program at my school. I've been part-time for the last 3 years, and I'm coming on full-time to take over the middle school band program. And it's been a little bit neglected as well. Kind of kids didn't really want to take band. They didn't want to stay in it, which is tough because it's actually compulsory for all the fifth graders. So they would hit sixth grade and like 3/4 of them would drop out. This was super sad for me to watch over the last few years, but the teacher was getting ready to retire and was kind of wrapping up his career. And so now I get to step in, and I've been maybe 2 months, coming up on 2 months in charge of the band program, and my eyes have been opened and crying. Because there's just so much, and even I opened a brand new school, my first job teaching, and of course I help music teachers all the time now, and I have all this great experience and background and managerial experience, and even I feel a little bit overwhelmed with the kind of stuff that I'm stepping into and having to take over and revamp and really want to make my own. And 3 years ago, I did that with the K4 program, which is, mainly vocal stuff and general music. And I've just loved watching how that's grown. And now it's hard to not be like super passionate and want to fix everything at the same time with the band program.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned about feeling overwhelmed has to be really high on the list of challenges. That is just really, really common, because there's so many elements to a really strong program that we take for granted when they're there. But when they're not there, and it's hard. It's hard psychologically, especially if you're comparing yourself to a more ideal situation.
Oh yeah.
And so we got to stop thinking that way, because it'll just stress us out, because it takes, oftentimes it does take years to build these programs. I'm still, I'm 8 years in to my situation. I'm still not even close to where we want to be. I mean, it's a strong program now, and I have a lot of student buy-in, and there's a really good word of mouth in the community. So, we've laid the groundwork, but still, there are things about, the theater situation and everything where my numbers aren't as high as I'd like them to be. And there's just a lot of things, scheduling issues, and, students get pulled off to do Avid and other things, because we don't have enough periods in our day and all that kind of stuff. But, you have to develop a certain psychology where you are feeling good and empowered about the improvements that you're making, rather than overwhelmed at all the distance you still need to cover, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's just, that's hugely important, because, you gotta stay in for the long haul. And if you're always comparing yourself against, that school over there that's always getting these kinds of awards and all that, or that school over there that's got 20% of their student body in their program and you've only got 5, whatever, I mean, you're always going to feel that sense of being like overwhelmed at all the work. And then when you've got these roadblocks in your way, like, my students have to, they can only take drama or band and they can't take both or whatever, or they can't, my administrators aren't going to let me do this or that or whatever. Those hurdles feel really, really big when, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, there's just some things that are completely out of your control, which is why in our episode today, we've narrowed it down to the 3 steps that you need to take when either revamping a program that you've already been in, or you're taking over one that's a little bit delinquent. So we're going to talk first about your first step is got to be assessment. And then your second step is to create a plan. And then your third step is to take action. So let's talk about first the assessment part of it, which for me has been so much kind of fun. Am I allowed to say that it was fun?
Sure.
to look over everything? And let's talk about a SWOT analysis. I love that you wrote that down, because obviously, like having an MBA, I always start with a SWOT analysis. But how do you see it?
Well, SWOT, if you don't know, it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so this is just the general sense of what you need going into these kinds of situations. You have to know, okay, well, what are the strengths and weaknesses that I'm dealing with? Going forward, what needs to be done? And obviously, we tend to look at the weaknesses more than anything else. But you got to look at your strengths too, because you got to know what your resources are. You got to know what you have to work with. And I think if you put it down on paper, then it's sort of more clinical, and it becomes something manageable that you can do, and not sort of invest your ego into it, or that sense of powerlessness that we talked about.
Yeah, let's be honest that the first step really has to be to put your ego aside. That you have to forget that you were the first chair trombone player for years and years and years, and this amazing student teacher, and you were able to take your groups to festival and get ones, and that ego stuff needs to go aside. But I will actually add into the show notes a video and SWOT analysis worksheet, because that's something that I have done with. So I'm trying to count how many businesses I've helped with that. But basically, strengths and weaknesses, they're internal to your program or your organization. So they're things that you have control over. The opportunities and threats, those are things that you have no control over. So your scheduling example, for example, is a good example of a threat, right? There's so many electives and kids are not wanting to do that. That's not something that is necessarily in your control. So instead of doing that, you mitigate the risk of that threat happening. And opportunities, again, are something that's out of your control. Maybe it's something that's already on the schedule that you can turn into a fantastic opportunity for outreach or for fundraising or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go ahead and add that training video for everybody to do a SWOT analysis. And then, the next step really is to look at your resources. Becoming a really resourceful teacher is something that I think all music teachers kind of are forced to have to do, don't you think?
Yes. And there's a broad range of resources that we need to be familiar with. And even if we don't have experience dealing with it, we have to know what's there and what we might be faced with. so I came up with this sort of list of things that to do when you're before your gig starts in the summer, whenever, before you're in the classroom, before you have students, and that is basically to look at how that K through 12 system of music education works in whatever situation you're going to be in, because it's just so diverse, and there are some best practices, but they're not always in place, and so you need to figure out how things work in the district or in the school that you're being hired into. You need to reach out and meet all of your feeder program teachers and be in contact with them, and hopefully have like events and festivals where you are, your students are coming into direct contact with students that are in the feeder program, or in the school that you are feeding. You need to meet and be on a first name basis with all of your district colleagues, that have the same kind of position as you, and any local college and university teachers that are going to be good resources for you. You need to know your administrators, the ones that directly oversee you in your program, in your job, which are your site administrators. Also, any district administrators, like, if you happen to have a music coordinator or a VAPA coordinator or something like that who works with all of your programs in your district, in a larger district, we'd have these kinds of administrators. If there are any boosters, parent boosters, or any just prominently engaged parents and also students over the summer, you can contact them and kind of sound them out about where things are and what you need to be thinking about. And also, I think one of the things that you want to do in any kind of situation is to find your mentors, especially if you're kind of in your early career phase. You need some reach out and really find mentors. And luckily in music education, we have a very sort of mentor rich environment, usually in most regions anyway. So what else? You need to learn about your events calendar, what the whole, not just for your program, but for the school, and how your events kind of fit in the larger scheme of things. And you need to learn how to go about reserving your facilities, performance spaces and everything, and permits, and how to do purchasing and POs, and what your budget is like. All this stuff are sort of like the mechanics of what you need to do, right? These are just what you need to figure out before the start of school.
I just looked at it when I started a couple weeks ago as from my realm of influence outward. So it's like, okay, who is closest to me in this job? Well, it's the current music students. So I wrote a letter to the current music students and all the parents and saying, hey, I'm going to be the band teacher next year. I'm super excited. I hope you all stay in band. If you have, taken a year off of band and want to come back, you're invited to come back. And then I thought, okay, who's next in this realm of influence? And I thought, well, it's the incoming students, right? So then I sent out a letter to them. Hey, I'm going to be the band teacher next year. I'm super excited. I can't wait to walk you all through how to pick your instruments. And then of course, I went to the teachers in my school, the staff, the administration, and just kind of work my way out, so that right now I'm developing relationships with the booster program at my school, like the PTA. And then also I've let all of the teachers know in the district that I'm taking over the program. And I emailed all the high school teachers, because my students will feed into the high schools. So I wanted to let them know that I want to be a good part of that relationship, which is kind of hard because I'm at this private Catholic school. So I only have like 50 students who graduate out of our school and go into the public high schools, but I still wanted to let them know I want to be involved, right? Mm-hmm. So you're exactly right in that you're going to have to reach out in ways that probably are going to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, and
Truly.
maybe some other people. Maybe some other people. I mean, I've kind of gotten the impression that my efforts to kind of shake the tree and to sort of shake the cobwebs out of this system in my in my district, in my feeder pattern. And, I might have stepped on some toes. I don't know. But there are some teachers out there that just kind of, they're sort of hidebound or barn sour and kind of waiting to retire, and they don't really want to take on anything new. But that's
Yeah, and,
that
and
again.
and you're going to probably at some point offend somebody or other,
Yeah,
but just
exactly.
stay positive and be nice and know that you're fulfilling a really important role for the students who are going to be in your program, and you want to make sure that you get off on the right foot as much as possible. And
That's
and
right.
again, that's one of those SWOT analysis things, that the threat of you coming in and changing things in a program which have been so established for so long, like that's a threat that you're going to
Yeah.
offend people, but it's one
Yeah.
that can easily be mitigated too, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just one of the most common mistakes that young teachers make is trying to make too many changes, that especially that first year. We're talking about a sort of a rebuilding situation where things aren't good and they're dysfunctional. So I think it's a little bit easier to change things when you're coming into that kind of situation than when you're taking over a strong program with a popular predecessor, right? That's the hard challenge. I mean, so when you're rescuing a program that nobody is sort of believing in, and there aren't any strong enduring traditions that the students are invested in, I mean, it's a lot easier to make changes the first year, but you still have to be careful, because there may be some things that are really important that you don't want to step on inadvertently. So that's why this assessment is so important, and to really get to bring your students into that process so that you get a sense of what might be important to them, that you don't want to change too quickly or too drastically. But
Right.
the great thing is that when you are taking over a program, or even just starting one from scratch, because I think this sort of all falls into the same set of practices. But when you're doing that, you have the ability really to create your dream job. You can make this program, if you're willing to put the years into it. You can make the program into kind of after your own image, so to speak. I mean, I'm what I do every year is great, because I I have events that fall into my own interests. We have two dinner fundraisers that we do, one per semester, and in the fall it's tied in with Columbus Day, and we call it our Bella Notte Italian dinner show, because I love Italian music and I love Italian food, Italian culture. I'm not Italian, but I love it, and I can't get enough of it. And there's like 6 centuries of amazing music in there, and then there's pure vowels, right?
Mm.
There's this. I don't know. It's kind of a pretext for me to have the students singing on pure vowels. But it's a great event, and it's like really in my wheelhouse. And also in the spring we do a madrigal dinner, and I love Renaissance music and that kind of entertainment. So those are things that I was able to start, and it's because it's according to my sensibilities. I'm always gonna love it. It's not like I'm stuck to doing something, some tradition that wasn't to my liking.
Mhm.
When you start over, or when you rebuild, you get to create traditions that are very much to your liking. So it's like it's like this dream job. I mean, I
Yeah.
love my job because I made it into something that I would want to do.
Well, I did the exact same thing actually. My first year I said we have to have a concert at the end of the year. We have to have some kind of year-end performance that keeps the kids excited and engaged through the second half of the year, because that didn't exist before I got there. And that also let me do exactly what you said, pick music that I thought was fun and entertaining. And so the first year I did music from around the world, and every grade got to do 2 selections. One is a song, one was a dance from all over the world. And it perfectly aligned with our curriculum too, which was great. And then last year I did what I called the time machine. And so each grade got to do a selection of songs from a different decade. And then this year we did what I call the hashtag blessed. Thanks to Ryan Guth for that. I stole it from him. And we did all spiritual and religious songs. And it's amazing that these end of year performances that I've created and that are along my interest level and sensibility, they're not only super fun for me, but the students have loved them and have looked forward to them. And 6 months after the fact, I have parents coming up to me and going, "Oh my God, that performance was just the most amazing." And,
Yeah.
I mean, sure, they still say that about the Veterans Day program, which is a legacy thing that I will always have to do that
Hmm.
maybe isn't my favorite, because there's only so many patriotic songs that you can do.
Right. Right.
Uh, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Creating it into something that you love. Okay, which leads us to the second part of our discussion today, which is creating a plan. So once you've done your SWOT analysis, you've analyzed all the stuff that you have, you figured out your do now things, you understand how the school works, you know your calendar, you've gone through your classroom space and really assessed everything that you have and looked really closely at the resources that you have so you can be resourceful. I feel like we sometimes fail jumping into a program and we're like, all right, we've got a budget. And then we start to think about how we can spend that budget without pre-thinking about the stuff that we already have that we may not need to buy more of, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So like that's how I felt going in was we're not going to have any music in the music library that I'm going to like. And then I got looking through it. I'm like, actually, there's some decent stuff. Okay, so anyway, moving on to a plan.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is where it gets the choices are just it's going to depend on your situation, obviously. But a few years ago, I wrote an article for the California ACDA chapter, and you can link it. I'm sure it's about the Japanese business philosophy called Kaizen, which is, we tend to translate that meaning continual improvement. And it's more than that. It's sort of what rescued the Japanese manufacturing businesses after the war. And there was an American who went down there. His name was William Denning, and he kind of he's brilliant, and he really taught these the Japanese businesses how to kind of their way out of being this sort of it was a rebuilding situation, right? I mean, they had to rebuild their manufacturing base after the war, and they did not have a reputation for quality for a good while. But then within like a decade or so, they were able to have a kind of a world leading reputation for quality. But they didn't do it by doing anything sort of earth shattering or incredibly new or incredibly innovative. There weren't any big game changers other than this dedication to Kaizen, or this continual feedback loop of program improvement. And that's what you want to think about when you're planning what you do, because there are all these elements that go into a really strong, successful music program. And you're going to start off with a certain, like a baseline on all of them. And I think that you need to, when you go in, you can make like a hugely what might seem to everybody, it might seem like a hugely revolutionary improvement, and you'll be like the hero of the community within a year or two, if you simply make incremental improvements in all areas of your program. So you got to look at your choir room or your band room, and physically, is it laid out well? You make improvements in that. You make improvements on your pedagogic materials and posters that are up. Paint, touch up, whatever, cleaning. Fine. You make improvements every year, all the time. you make improvements in your culture of your ensembles. Are they bonding? Are they doing activities outside of school? Do they have T-shirts? And do they? How's your social student leadership program? Right. The student traditions, your social media, your events calendar, how you market and promote your events. I believe you need to make sure that you've got professionally, or what look like professionally designed posters and flyers. Don't make the well-intended mistake of using students to design your posters. How's your online ticketing for concerts, your fundraising? Are you making improvements on your fundraising, and also how you're teaching, your sight singing and pedagogy and all that stuff, your community outreach, your advocacy, how your own office is set up. You can make improvements on that every year. So all these different things, all these different elements of a good music program, you may not be able to make earth-shattering improvements on any one of them in any given year, because those sorts of improvements are often out of your control. But what is going to be in your control is making incremental improvements in all these different processes. So if you can do that, if you can make across the board incremental improvements in everything, the aggregate effect is going to really change the tone of your program, and your students are going to notice that everything is a little better.
Can I share some examples of how?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so I stepped into the band program when our teacher was not ready to retire. He had surgery and wasn't able to return. So I kind of got pushed a little bit faster into it than I wanted to. But there were some procedures that I changed immediately. Like the fifth graders were every day coming in and just dropping their instruments on the band room floor. And the band room was always full of chairs and stands. So it always felt very cluttered. So I took the shelves out of my old classroom, brought them into the band room, and I labeled them. Flutes go here, clarinets go here, trumpets go here, saxophones go here. And so when the fifth graders would come in, they knew exactly where to leave their instruments, and they were up off the floor. And they couldn't believe what a difference it made, in opening up the classroom. And then because I had to teach my younger students in there too, I started having them clean up their chairs and stands. So all of a sudden I started hearing from the students, wow, our classroom is so much more organized. Oh, I love being in here. They started to come in and want to hang out at lunchtime, which had never been done before. And it was just two little things that I changed. I added a row of shelves for instruments, and then we started putting away the chairs and stands when we were done. It was like the tiniest things, and it took me a whole 30 seconds of time, And
Right.
then for our the concert, because I had to do an end of year concert with them, I said, instead of wearing t-shirts or whatever, we're going to wear concert black. We're going to go head to toe black, except for gentlemen who are going to wear ties. Like, I don't even care what color shirt you wear, as long as it's got a collar and you wear a tie. And they couldn't believe how much a difference it made at their performance, that they had to dress up a little nicer, And I wore like my formal black conductor gown, and the difference in their showmanship really came through. So you're absolutely right. Just the smallest little tweaks to every little thing just makes a huge difference year after year.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about really is what I would call the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
You're talking about making big differences very easily, very quickly, just by the power of your own creativity. And just about anybody could make these types of improvements in any kind of program. And I think that if you're focused on that, if you're focused on the improvements that you're making and the sense of gratitude that you have for being involved in that and seeing these improvements come to light, and the effect that they're having on the students and everything, I mean, that is something that can go a long way to counter that feeling of being overwhelmed at all the problems you're dealing with, and all of the things you need to do in order to make it a strong program. And so I think that if that is your mindset on focusing on all the little successes, then, if you have a setback one year in some major area, like, in my program, we kept building our enrollments every year. We were recruiting, and, every year we grow the program by about 15-20%. Well, one year I had a small freshman class, and so we took a hit on enrollments, and, well, it didn't really matter. It didn't really matter because we were making strides in all these different other areas, So I think that's really the mindset that you really need to develop as somebody going into a rebuilding situation, is to celebrate all of your little victories, as opposed to worrying about, all the problems.
Well, and that kind of leads us into our third area of discussion, which is taking action. So I've found that when I counsel business owners, they often get that overwhelming, feeling, especially entrepreneurs or people wanting to start their own thing, right?
Right.
And so I love to break it down into, yes, you have these big overarching goals. Like, for example, maybe you want to have a full-blown booster program that funds your program 100%, right? So you don't have to have student fees, and you can take them on tours, and you can do all this great stuff. Like that's the big goal, right? But then you've got to break that down into objectives. And then you break those objectives down into individual tasks. And then you just start banging out the tasks. And you can lay them out on your calendar, and, the tasks are the easy things. And then for each task that you accomplish, there's a set of tasks. They become how you obtain those objectives. And then those objectives, when those are all accomplished, then effectively you've gotten your goal. So maybe your goal is this great, big, robust funding program. But maybe one of the things to start on, the low-hanging fruit that could make a big difference, is just to start asking for donations at a concert. Like
Okay.
You go to your principal and you say, I'm ready to start a booster program. They're going to kind of chuckle, well, we
Right.
have a PTA. Why do you need a booster program?
Yeah.
Well, I want to take the kids on tour. On tour, we don't even do field trips, So do start in those smaller incremental steps, but always have in your mind that you do want it to be this big, wonderful, ideal thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if that's your thing, maybe you're good with how it is. That's all right too.
In the example of starting up a booster program, start asking for parent volunteers, and you can use stuff like Sign Up Genius to kind of organize that process and automate some of the management of it, of finding volunteers in your parent community that are going to want to help. And pretty soon, you're going to have some parents who are always showing up to volunteer and are more invested and kind of believing in you. And that's the core of your booster program right there. I think what you were hitting on is really effective. And this is why I really love the work that you do, because you kind of have your finger right on the pulse of it. And that's this idea of just either personal or professional efficacy, I guess. Or I just finished the Getting Things Done book by David Allen, and that it was, for me, it was just kind of a mind blower about how right that information is for music educators. Because music educators, we have this amazing amount of detail that we have to manage, right? And we have so many different facets of our jobs that nobody else has to deal with on your campus. We're not just educators, right? That's just one hat that we wear. We have to reach out to the community. We have to promote concerts and manage concerts. We have to sort of manage up to our administration in ways that other teachers don't have to. We have to manage our events and backstage and front of house and all of this stuff. We have to manage the finances, or at least have our hand in the management of the finances. If we have a booster group that handles it, great. But there are all these different hats that we have to wear, and they all are very sort of detail rich jobs that can overwhelm us. And I think that this, what you're talking about setting aside time for, weekly and monthly assessment and planning, it's tremendously important. And we don't get that kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
People don't get that kind of training, really. And, the sort of basic skills and habits that make us effective in our jobs, and how we deal with our inboxes. We've got the the reason people procrastinate, I think, is because their inboxes are just so overwhelming, and there's so many like sort of open tasks that are like left undone, and they can't get a handle on that, so they just kind of go home and have a glass of wine, right?
Or a bottle, whatever.
Yeah.
No judgment here.
And so this book, I think, maybe you can link to it, Getting Things Done by David Allen. It really helps to come up with a system to manage the details of the inbox, and how to kind of automate things and get them done to where they don't get procrastinated, they don't get forgotten, they don't get shoved down, your inbox in your emails or whatever. I mean, it's really, really important stuff, and it's that kind of thing it just makes the world a difference.
Well, the thing that will blow your mind is that in the entrepreneurial world, that kind of stuff is second nature. Like it's the number one thing that you're trained on is how to get things done, right? We just don't talk about that in music education.
Yeah.
So like that's why I think I'm so passionate about it. In fact, I was a guest on the Music Tech Teacher podcast with Katie Wardrobe, and we spent an hour sharing like our very best productivity tips. And it was kind of mind-blowing to me because when she introduced me at the beginning of the episode, she starts listing all of these things that I do, right? She's like, well, Elisa does this podcast, and she's the director of the International Music Education Summit, and she has a thriving blog, and she's an author of books, and she's a music teacher. And she just kept going for like 5. And I couldn't help but kind of laugh that she's absolutely right. I do all of that stuff. And I'm the director of our community band, but I still get everything done. And I'm able to do that because I've learned the systems, and I do set aside time twice a day actually for planning and self-reflection. So I do my own personal improvement first thing in the morning. And then at night is when I do all of my professional planning and plan out my day, week, month, and make sure that I'm achieving my goals that way. So you're absolutely right. And I will add a link to Getting Things Done in our show notes. So if that sounds like a fun, interesting book to y'all, you can check it out.
Yeah. One of the really powerful things that David Allen talks about is just, I'll throw this out there because it is really powerful, and it kind of gets you unstuck on these projects that you kind of had this feeling of dread or foreboding or avoidance about.
Everybody has them too. Everybody has them.
Absolutely. But now more than ever, because we're having to manage an amazing amount of detail in our work, and an amazing diversity of types of projects. And that is that, you need to get in the habit of deciding on what your next physical action is going to be on that project. Not conceptually, I'm going to, have a board meeting, a booster board meeting. Well, no, that's not your next action. Your next physical action is to email somebody, maybe. You really, really bring it down to that level of, okay, what is the very next thing I'm going to do? And don't put it away until you've decided that. Don't, just make a decision and on what your next physical action is. And that is that's a game changer, because then you always have, you'll do that next action rather than sort of having it sit in your brain and kind of fester as that thing that, I got to get to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're looking at the end instead of looking at the actual thing that you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean,
sometimes you just need to kick yourself in the butt and do it.
Exactly. I mean, if you need to, drive to New York City, well, and you don't know the way, well, that's a pretty daunting task if you live in California. But if you break it down into, okay, well, the first thing I need to do is get in my car. Well, okay, I can do that. Next
Yeah.
thing I have to do is turn the key. You break it down into steps, but all you really need to know to get unstuck is the very next thing they have to do.
That's true. That's very true. And then, amazingly enough, if you do that thing, then the motivation and the momentum to get the next thing done is even easier. It
Yeah.
truly is that first step can be the hardest.
Yes. And the magic of writing stuff down, writing, just having that time where you weekly kind of review the next week's work, or you're reviewing an upcoming project, just writing down what you have to do instead of relying on your memory. Using these tools, whether it's a paper base or it's in the cloud or whatever, just getting it down as in a written visual form that you can come back to later, it relieves your tension, because then it's not stuff that you're having to burden yourself to remember. Right.
And can I share my newest mental trick that's super
Sure.
fun?
Yes.
I've been trying to change the term "I have to" or "I should" into "I get to." Right? Like I know I should make this flyer for an upcoming rehearsal. Well, I should. But if I think, well, I get to make it, it completely flips it around in your brain. Instead of it becoming a burden, it becomes something that's exciting and that you're anxious to do. So even just convincing ourselves by that turn of phrase is, at least for me, that's been working significantly for me to decrease my anxiety about tasks that I do have to do, that I should do, but maybe don't want to. I just
Okay.
change it to, well, I get to do that, right?
I'll try to next time I have that irate parent who's sending me toxic emails about some weird thing, I get to
Exactly.
deal with this parent.
But you do, Bruce. You get to take that opportunity to develop that relationship, or
Yeah,
you
that's true.
get to
That's
be the
true.
one to make the next move to get it to change, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
So it is a you get to. I mean,
that's right. You get to rebuild a music program, which is a huge privilege. You
oh
know,
yeah. And it's super fun. And as long as you can stave off the overwhelm by taking it in order, assessing where you are, making a plan, using those, incremental changes, going after the low-hanging fruit, and then just taking action and making sure that you do set aside time daily, weekly, monthly, and take those very first actions. Action. Oh, and
absolutely.
I am going to type up all this into a massive checklist so that everybody can, if you've taught for some time and you're just ready to revamp some things, this is going to be a great tool to enable you to action.
Yeah, because I think what we're talking about really are best practices that could help anybody at any time, at any phase in their career, at any point in the growth of their programs. I mean, I think there are certain things that are specific to rebuilding situations where you don't have the student buy-in and you don't have a lot of investment, on the part of the administrators, or there are things that are specific to that. You might end up programming more pop music, for instance, when you don't have student buy-in and the students aren't trusting your choices. That's just one example of things that you might do differently in a rebuilding situation than in a strong program. But really what we're talking about are just kind of a set of best practices that are geared towards growth. And I don't know of any program that is just, too big and too good. You can always make improvements.
Yeah. In fact, it's the big, robust programs that are doing so well that have the teachers that are most actively, consistently improving. I remember my
Yeah.
first day of student teaching, and there were 3 of us at that school that were about to do our student teaching. And the principal at the school brought us in and sat us down at his desk. And he said, "You all three are so fortunate you're going to be with master teachers. Do you know what makes the difference between an average teacher and a master teacher?" And we all just stood there staring at him like, we have no idea what you're talking about. This is our first time in a public school. And he said that master teachers know they don't know everything, and they're willing to learn, and they're willing to grow, and they're open to that. The programs that tend to stagnate are the ones where they think they already know everything.
Yeah, I see that. I see that.
Which will never be me, because I know nothing.
they think they know everything, or they get wrapped up in all the reasons why they can't grow. They just, everything is so horrible and so insurmountable, and that it's just, and it's always they're victims.
Yeah, excuses. Yep.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, no, I can change this.
Because, my school, the parents are doing this and they make me do this and I can't do, whatever. It's always some reason why they can't do this cool thing. Right?
The limiting beliefs.
Yeah. How
dare they? Just never take no for a solid answer. I will have my music room painted this summer.
Yeah. Well,
to take us back to where we started.
Exactly. And there may be things that you can't overcome, but they're all within the context of so many things that are going to be in your control, that to make these improvements from year to year. And your students are going to love you for it. The community is going to embrace you. And, you're going to have people coming out of the woodwork. Oh my God, you're the best thing that happened to this school since blah, 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 and that's a great feeling. Even if you're not my dirty little secret is I still have this imposter syndrome in my work. I still don't really feel like legitimately like, wow, I'm as good as these other teachers.
See, that super surprises me because you are totally legit.
Well, but I'm kind of self-taught. I never had that student teaching experience, and I kind of lied my way into this position. I started out with 60% math. I mean, I had this dual credential, math and music, which I highly recommend, if possible, to any early career music teachers. If there's any other subject matter that you could get another credential in through testing, here in California, we've got the subject equivalent tests, and so you can get cleared to teach in another subject area. And I happen to be strong in math, so I had this dual credential, and I had 40% choir. And she, I walked in with my resume and talked to the principal, and she said, well, you teach music too and math. Well, could you teach choir? And I said, sure, I could teach choir. So I had to learn on the job, and so I still don't feel like that master teacher. But then when I look at what has been accomplished just through sheer grit and determination, and and I've learned, that's the thing about being effective, is that it's what Stephen Covey calls sharpening the saw. Mm-hmm. You have to invest in yourself. So when you get any kind of a job, make sure that you talk to your administrator about release time for conferences, and release time to go and observe other programs, and to develop these mentor relationships that we talked about, because that'll just really put a lot of wind into your sails, so to speak.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so we've got tons of awesome links in the show notes now. We're going to do a SWOT analysis form and video, compliments of my business consulting firm, of course.
Great.
And I'm going to link over to my Music Booster manual book. We'll also link you to the Getting Things Done and the Kaizen in the Classroom article by Bruce.
Yeah, I think that's it. That'll get someone along their way for sure. Really, thank you for having me on here again. I just think it's wonderful what you're doing. I think the spirit of entrepreneurship in music education is it kind of makes the whole thing fun and effective, and it's just something that I wish was taught in all of our music education programs, because it's what we do. I mean, we are directing essentially a nonprofit performing arts program. We're essentially like the artistic directors of a nonprofit, and so.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll work on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know this was one of our longer episodes, so thank you for sticking with us. Now we're coming to a close. I encourage you to not only go to smartmusic.com and discover what they can do for you in your classroom, but also go there to the blog, that's smartmusic.com/blog, and search for episode 028, where you'll discover the show notes. That's where you'll find the SWOT analysis tool, all the videos and downloads we talked about, as well as a fantastic download to help walk you step by step through all the stuff we talked about in the episode today. We always love to provide you helpful links and additional information so you can implement what we talk about in each episode. Remember to subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and share with your fellow music educators. Let's make sure everyone has the opportunity to learn and grow and create the life and career that they love. As always, my friends, keep teaching on.